Good evening. Welcome back to Public Administration, and we're entering our sixth week. And this week we are going to actually just read the text and have a couple of extra readings to do. So there's no extra videos or anything this week, but we're going to focus on the fifth chapter, and like I said, we have three additional readings. So first off, I want you to make sure you start responding to your discussion from last week and move on and read the fifth chapter of the text. And then there's three additional readings, and I'll go over those with you. They're not too long, so this shouldn't be a very intense week for you. And then you're going to post two initial posts again to this week's discussion questions. So make sure you have it done by Sunday of next week. I know some people have kind of fallen off with that. Make sure you get back on track with that. Like I said, this is done for a real reason, to have you actually have a discussion. I found that in these online classes, it's much nicer to have you guys teach each other. And so it gives you the time to take the information and process it and move forward with the material. And then there's a Dropbox assignment about this chapter, and of course the quiz. So it's not a very, like I said, it's not going to be a very intense week for you. What we are going to focus on is we're going to have a discussion that looks at comparable worth, and that is a way to deal with inequality with pay in work. And so, like other things, I'm sure you're noticing that public administration is much bigger than just political science. So we draw from numerous sources, from science and academia, and business and the military are actually two places that we look to a lot in the study of public admin. So what you saw McChrystal last week, that is something that's very common in public administration, is looking at the military. And the reason why is because militaries all around the world have a bureaucratic structure, and they also usually have a lot of records. And so if there's a problem, there's usually a way to research the problem and discuss it with a lot more transparency than you can with even business. Things are done the same through the military, through traditions, and when traditions are changed, they're noted. So we understand when there's a change, and you can see how that results in in changes that are felt downstream. Business is quite different. Business changes a lot. When you have business, new leadership can really change things around. Also, changing regulations and our culture can have an effect on business too. So business has a lot of changes. So today we're actually going to look at comparable worth, which is looked at in public admin, to look at paying people fairly, just compensation. And then you're also going to look at a case that just came out. It's about Tesco. So it's a company in London, in England, and they're facing a discrimination claim for inequality in their wages. Human resources are another area. They're in business, but there's something that they're similar to public admin, where people who study human resources generally look towards government, because government hires a lot of people and they have human resource issues. So in this class, you're going to look at this sociological or political science view on comparable worth, and then you're going to see how a business could be paying for having inequality in their pay. And this is something that is of growing concern around the world. So I want you to really pay attention to this. One case that I do remember that really goes over comparable worth is looking at a trucking company, and the trucking company paid the truck drivers really, really well, but paid the dispatchers very poorly. And the argument the dispatchers made was, look, without us, these trucks would not end up where they need to be, and the whole company would make a lot less money without good dispatching. This is a very large company I'm talking about, and they had very complicated dispatching that happened where truckers had to move around, and so there was a major argument brought out by the dispatchers saying we're a very important part of this machine of this mechanism, and we deserve better compensation. You're also going to look at collective bargaining, which is something that we don't discuss much in South Dakota because it is a right to work state and there's not much union activity here. But as you look around, public public sector unions have actually been growing over the years, but they've also been facing a lot of challenges. So there's a lot of hostility downwards from the administrators in states. So everywhere from Wisconsin to, I believe, even South Dakota is having this happen right now, where there's some attacks on collective bargaining for the public workers. I don't know too much about that because I'm not in a union, but it's something that I do want you to look at, and we're going to have a discussion on this. There are some ideas about unions that are pretty interesting to consider, and one is states that have union participation usually have higher pay for everybody. Also, usually a little bit better benefits for everybody, even people who aren't involved in the unions. So, while it's easy to say that unions can get out of hand, I do think it's important to consider that executives and businesses and managers and legislatures can get out of hand too if they're not left with a check. So if the union has no power to fight back, for the average worker, then there is a problem as well. So there's got to be some kind of balance. And but you're going to have a discussion where you're going to be able to talk about that. But I do want you to keep in mind that maybe you're not part of a union, but I do want you to try to open up your eyes and your minds to the idea that maybe a union is something that you might want to consider having a little more interest in. But I do know from past experiences in this class, a lot of students don't know much about unions or they're not too familiar with them. So, but it's something that I do want you to look into a little bit. Then we have Chapter 5 quiz. Then the Dropbox, again, is going to be based on this chapter. The thing of this textbook, I'm sure some of you noticed, it is kind of dry in parts. I did have a student tell me that it reads kind of like an operations manual, but it's a really good textbook. This textbook covers a ton of information, and it packs it into shorter chapters than you usually deal with a public admin textbook. And so I do know it was an expensive book, and I do know that the reading is a little dry. I want you to appreciate the fact that this book is full of information. So part of the reason why it's kind of expensive is because people who buy this book generally hold on to it. So it's difficult to find used copies. But I want you to rely heavily on the textbook. This is a strong text. A lot of students use this going into grad school, and they'll hold on to it throughout their whole program because it's such a good reference. So you're going to use a textbook to answer these two questions, and then we have our checklist, of course. And then I found the extra reading material. I didn't have much time to review it, but it looks like a downloadable version of looking at the economics of comparable worth. So if this is something you're interested in, there's a free copy of this book for you to download, and you could see what you'd think. I always like when you find free things like this online, but it's just extra material. You don't have to read it. It's just there in case you are interested. So if you have any questions, make sure you get back to me and send me an email, and I do look forward to to speaking with you. And last week I apparently made a strange mistake where I posted the due dates as being in March on the checklist. On our actual sheet, I believe I still put February, but I don't know how I did that. I must have just had a lack of coffee or something. But I do apologize, and I do have that addressed. So thank you for letting me know about that, and have a great week.